Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we have a top panel with us that was united in a very quick space of time. Since on Monday, the world was surprised with an attack, a military attack on the international airport of Abu Dhabi and some oil facilities that are nearby this airport. This is an airport that, well, I am quite familiar with. Abu Dhabi has been a very important point for the West in general and Europe in particular. And this attack that was called by the so-called Houthis, that is the Ansar Allah from Yemen, calls a lot of questions. And I think we managed to get here three experts that will lead us to have an understanding, a global understanding of what is going on, taking into consideration the key players of this act. And these are fundamentally Yemen, or the Ansar Allah within Yemen, Iran, that is using a terrorist outfit as a proxy for its own goals, and what I would call the West in general. So we will have one by one, we will address these topics, or we will address the situation departing from these topics. And then we will have hopefully some time to make a bit of questions and answers. You are very, very well to use both Facebook and YouTube to formulate your questions. You are very welcome to do so. I would just like to say that as the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, said, this attack on civilian and civilian infrastructures are prohibited by international humanitarian law. This is a very important departure point that we owe to the Secretary General of the United Nations. And from this standpoint, I would invite, in the first place, Irina. So Irina is she is an American lawyer and analyst based in New York. She has written extensively in foreign policy and security issues, she is going to address the whole of the situation, starting by Yemen. And so I would like to give you the floor, Irina. Please go ahead.
Many thanks for inviting me to join this discussion. Hopefully, in the future, we can focus on more positive matters. I'll start by explaining who are the Houthis who took formally the responsibility for the attack on the Abu Dhabi airport and oil facilities. The Houthis started out as a clan, as a family, but right now they're colloquially, this is a reference to not only the members of that particular family leading the movement, but their followers and all those who join them in the uprising against Yemen's legitimate government in September 2014, which led to a civil war, eventually joined by the Arab coalition led by Saudi Arabia after Yemen's legitimate government asked for assistance in putting down this uprising. However, the Houthis, that particular family, has had issues preceding these events. Originally, Houthi started out as a Zaidi Shia group, a fairly peaceful one. It was an ally of Saudi Arabia going back to the 60s against the Nasserist communist forces, which interfered with Yemen. That has led to a whole host of unfortunate events, a major war, the 1962 Constitution of Yemen, which guaranteed equality and the law for all people, and which Houthis at the time shared in, despite being a religious subminority in the region, a branch of Shia Islam that is considered even a minority within the general uh, theological branch. They were fairly peaceful. They were fairly well integrated with the rest of the population. That particular clan originated in Saada. However, by the early 1990s, the situation started to change. Hussein al-Houthi, the founder of the current movement, political movement, um, started moving away from the traditional premises of the population and started exploring the historical roots of Yemen's imamate, and eventually started writing and created a body of work of over 2,000 pages, which essentially took that clan and eventually its followers in a far more radical direction. Over the course of the 1990s, they embraced extreme Islamist dogma. They embraced elements of Khomeinism, and they started receiving assistance from Iran, which started out as assistance in smuggling weapons to Yemen through other countries, and eventually led to a full-fledged partnership. And towards the later days of the civil war in Yemen, essentially the Houthis became subsumed by Iran and became less of an equal partner and more of a proxy for Iran's own agenda. Going back to Houthis' ideology as it emerged under Hussein al-Houthi, uh, it essentially took a great deal from Hezbollah's model, both in terms of the structure and military training, as well as ideological premises. In fact, in a report produced by the Yemen embassy, there is a specific reference by Hussein al-Houthi. He states that the Hezbollah leaders are the masters of the Mujahideen in this world. They are the ones who give martyrs. They are the ones who really preserved the face of the nation. Now, who are Hezbollah? Hezbollah is another Iranian proxy, which now leads the Lebanese government. They started out a as a as an insurgent group and became more of a full-fledged military group with the social and political components, which eventually came to power through political means, but nevertheless continues to be involved in organized crime, terrorism, and operations around the world in conjunction with other proxies, networks, and organizations. And it became an extremely successful organized group, which managed to accumulate hundreds of thousands of missiles, which essentially hold the entire region hostage from Lebanon. It used the Lebanon as a piggy bank to fund the Iranian operations and the exportation of the Islamic Revolution to the rest of the region and even beyond. It became a model for other proxies, and it became heavily involved in both ideological and military training of groups like the Houthi movement, which is why Hussein al-Houthi gives it so much credit in his works. Unfortunately, that's not the only military structure and organization are not the only things that were taken from Hezbollah. Radical position on Jews, the United States, Israel, and even other Arab nations were part and parcel of this ideological restructuring, radicalization, and extremism. What actually makes Houthis unique, however, and somewhat and it's a particular emphasis for them more so than for other Iranian proxies, is the concern with the Hashemite clan structure. Hashemites are a reference to the tribes that are supposed to be descended from the Prophet Muhammad, and Hussein al-Houthi gave that generational, ethnic tribal background a great deal of importance. He believed that Houthis, who he claims are actually descendant from Prophet Muhammad, have to be the leaders in Yemen due to this religious connection. And as and essentially, he pushed for the imposition of special taxes called the Hams tax, a fifth um, tax that on other families and tribes within Yemen in support of the Hashemites. And basically, he claimed uh, cultural ethnic primacy based on that, and which allows discrimination of everyone else in Yemen. And this is what we are seeing today. Houthis have organized themselves based on these principles. They imposed special burdens on the rest of the population that came under their control. At the same time, they used kinship based methods to infiltrate significant portions of the population. By marrying into leading families in the region, they were able to establish successful intelligence networks, all trained by Hezbollah and later by RGC advisors. And they were able to take control little by little of the population. They took advantage uh, of the popular discontent against some of the corruption issues in the Saleh government, which they were able to overthrow. As a result, the current president, President Hadi, came to power as the head of the legitimate Yemen government. The Houthis, however, continued from the 90s through early 2000s. Hussein al-Houthi was eventually killed in battle during one of the many wars and skirmishes between the Houthis and their followers and the legitimate government. There's a long history of these wars leading up to the main civil war that's ongoing to this day. Uh, and with time, Iran's involvement and support for the Houthis increased. From basic training, they trained them in mine operations. As a result, all of Yemen is filled with mines all the way to the borders with Saudi Arabia. Over 2 million mines have been planted, many have been killed. Iran and Hezbollah pushed for child soldier recruitment as a form of ideological control and terror of the villages and populations. Nearly 100,000 children under the age of 15 had been recruited and trained in special camps and schools established by the Houthis, brainwashed, indoctrinated with the slogan "Death to America, Death to Israel, curse the Jews," which has been actually also exported abroad to US and elsewhere through Houthi propaganda machinery, also generously supported and funded by Iran. The Houthis have been known to fundraise extensively in support of Hezbollah efforts and Iran when during the worst of the sanctions imposition and maximum pressure on Iran and its proxies. So that network has become very powerfully intertwined, and of course, they follow the ideological premises of Khamenei's revolution. For instance, the women are being increasingly erased from the public space in Yemen and in the territories controlled by the Houthis. The Houthis established special brigades of women enforcers who are trained to follow Iran's own model, and they harass women for wearing for public appearance. They even enter their homes to make sure that they're dressed according to the homes. And the crackdown on women's rights has been continuous and worsened over time, with women now needing permission from a male family member just to leave the house, much less go to work or do anything of that sort. Most women in Houthi-controlled territories do not work. They're left on the verge of starvation. They're not provided for, and Houthis divert humanitarian aid, mostly distributing it to their own followers and clans. They raid hospitals, and they make the situation. They've created one of the worst humanitarian disaster in the world by raiding hospitals, by leaving the population on the verge of starvation, creating an artificial famine, numerous epidemics such as cholera and dysentery plaguing the territory. And of course, COVID made the situation even worse from a humanitarian standpoint. Nevertheless, the radical teachings of the Houthis continue. Attacks on civilians in Marib and other Yemen areas continue. They've attacked Saudi Arabia's civilian and military sites many times. By the same token, they curse the Arab coalition in the same way they antagonize against Jews, Israel, and Americans. And they've also threatened UAE in 2019, prior to UAE withdrawing most of its forces from Yemen. So the current situation is not the first time when Houthis specifically threatened UAE. With that, this is kind of an overview of the Houthi angle of that, and I'll let the other participants discuss Iran's role in this latest development more.
Well, thank you so much, Irina. I think that you, in a very short span of time, you managed to give us a very important picture. First, really the terrible humanitarian disaster that is widespread in this country, in Yemen, and the very first responsible is this group who is fundamentalist. It wants to reclaim the more reactionary traditions of what they claim to be their way of looking at Islam. They are absolutely for a supremacist religious vision. Within this supremacist religious vision, of course, number one hate goes to Jews. It's not really a surprise. It happens in a lot of places. And these so-called Houthis, there is one of the famous commanders was named Houthi, and some of even the antagonists of the group decided to use this name. I think it is a bit misleading, because a lot of people that are not familiar with the situation hears Houthi. Well, Houthi sounds a bit like, some exotic ethnic group, but this is not really an exotic ethnic group. This is Ansar Allah, that is molded after Hezbollah. That means terrorism. That means Islamic Revolutionary Guards materialization of repression of human rights, of repression of the normal freedom that people enjoy, and that's what people should realize. This is a tremendously important picture. Before pressing the floor to Elena, just let me say that there were 3 fatalities in this attack, 2 Indian citizens and 1 Pakistani citizen. I would like to express, in the name of all of us, the condolences to the families, and also to the condolences to the countries where these 3 persons came from. And of course, to say that we are absolutely in solidarity with Abu Dhabi, with the Emirate authorities, and reinforcing once again that the Western world cannot cannot look the other side when an attack like this is made. But from Yemen, we have to go to Iran, exactly, because as Irina explained, this is masterminded by Iran, and actually we have a guest, a very high-profile guest, I have to say. She's a broadcast journalist, but she was the Deputy Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Anti-Semitism at the United States Department of State. And actually, well, a bit longer ago, she was born in Tehran. And we are now asking her to speak about Iran and to explain to us a bit how does it fit in the whole of the scenery. Please, Ellie, the floor is yours.
Paulo, thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be with you all today. And yes, I do want to share my condolences with the families of the victims and express my solidarity with the United Arab Emirates, but also with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Yemeni people, all who are victims of the Houthis attacks. And before I pivot to Iran, I want to speak a little bit about the United States. As you mentioned, Paulo, I was an envoy in the US State Department during the Trump administration. And during our administration, my colleagues in the State Department went through a very detailed, exhaustive, and lengthy process of determining that the Houthis are a terrorist organization, and they designated them a foreign terrorist organization. Now, just so you can understand, this is not a casual process, and any administration that has designated in the past any terror group as an FTO designation has gone through this very same process. What we were shocked to see is when the Biden administration came into office in January, and one of the first things that they did almost immediately after coming in was lifting this FTO designation. And of course, the issue here is that the Houthis have a proven track record. This attack on Abu Dhabi is the most recent attack, but it's not the first attack by any stretch of the imagination. And the civilian casualties in this attack last week were also not the first civilian casualties. And so what we saw happen with the Biden administration lifting the FTO designation is that when the Houthis continue to do what they do, which is to launch terror attacks, every time the Houthis have done that since January, all the Biden administration has been able to do is issue statements of condemnation. And the reality is that we're way past the point where statements of condemnation are acceptable. I was glad to see President Joe Biden in an address this week to the United States, to the people of America, mentioned that there's consideration now on reversing course and redesignating the Houthis as an FTO. And so I think that all people of good conscience would encourage the Biden administration to go ahead and accept that perhaps they made a mistake and it's time to correct themselves and correct course. So from the American perspective, I really just wanted to start with that and let's have an honest conversation about the need to redesignate the Houthis for what they are, as a foreign terror organization. And after that, the United States will have more means at their disposal to deal with the Houthis in the correct manner. I want to now move on to what I had said I would be happy to address, which is the ties between the Houthis and their patron state, which is the Iranian regime, the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now, what we know about the Islamic Republic is that since 1979, when the Ayatollah Khomeini came into power in Iran with a radical Islamic revolution that took power over from the king at the time, the Shah Reza Pahlavi, is that the regime has ruled with a very radical extremist ideology. And one of the fundamentals of the constitution that they created and of the ideology which they espouse is the notion of regional hegemony under the rule of Iran. So they have this hegemonic desire to rule the Middle East, North Africa region, and truly the world. And in this ideology, there's also the belief, I suppose, that the emperor of this new empire would be the supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei himself. And what the Iranian regime has found to be, I think, an incredibly successful strategy for them is what they call themselves, what they're calling regional depth, is what they're calling it. And the way that they've achieved this regional depth is by funding, training, and arming proxies all over the Middle East, North Africa region. And also, I need to point out, in Latin America, on the doorstep of the United States as well. So as we heard from our last speaker, the expert Irina Tsukerman, the Iranian proxies include Hezbollah in Lebanon, which has completely destabilized and I would say destroyed that country, and which threatens Israel routinely. You have Hamas in Gaza, which also threatens Israel routinely. You have Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq, which is completely destabilizing and in the process of destroying the country of Iraq, as Hezbollah has done in Lebanon. And then, of course, you've got, and there are more on the list, and then, of course, you've got the Houthis in Yemen. Now, what the Iranian regime has found with this strategy is that, again, that they are arming, training, funding their proxies. And so what the proxies do is they do the dirty work of the regime for them. So in every, and I should mention that the Houthis right now, as we've discussed, are attacking the Emirates, they're attacking the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, they're threatening to attack Israel, and we know that that their reach is in the entire Gulf region. What the Iranians have found to be incredibly successful about their proxy activity is that the proxies are doing the dirty work of the regime for them. And in return, the countries that are under a proxy attack retaliate against the proxies. So to unpack that dynamic a little bit, what you're finding is that the proxies are really the ones who are not the beneficiaries of this relationship, right? Because the people in those countries, and so if we're talking about the Houthis, the people in Yemen are the ones who are suffering. They are the ones who are facing an unprecedented humanitarian crisis. They are the ones who are really in the line of fire, while it's really Iran that is the cause of these issues. And I think one of the pieces of policy advice that I wanted to share on this webinar with everyone is that the time, I believe, has come for all of the countries that are under attack from the Iranian proxies to perhaps rethink their strategy of retaliation. So, is it smart for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to continue to keep the focus on the Houthis? Is it smart for the Emiratis to continue to keep the focus on the Houthis? Is it smart for Israel to continue to keep the focus on Gaza and Hezbollah? Or is it time for all of these states and the Western powers and the United States of America to truly confront the sponsor of all of this murder, destabilization, and destruction at its source, which we all know is the Islamic Republic of Iran? And so with that, I thank you all for your time, and I look forward to continuing this discussion on this webinar.
Fantastic. I think I mean, I rarely see it put so well. Ellie, I'm overwhelmed with the clearness of the way you presented the issue. Let's first say to you that I extend, of course, my own sympathy to all of the victims. The most damaged victims are the Yemeni people of this war. no doubt about that. And of course, Saudi Arabia deserves our solidarity in this case. And what you propose is absolutely vital, that the whole of the victims, starting perhaps with the Abraham Accords, will look deeply in a way to see the source of the problem. You described very well, this is a model of Hezbollah, how Hezbollah destroyed Lebanon. I've been there several times, I saw it. I haven't seen sometimes what I would have liked to see, which is an understanding in the West of what is going on. Iraq, I've been there many, many times, one of them in an official capacity, exactly through Abu Dhabi, through European military aircraft from Abu Dhabi. And I think that I could not imagine a better way of putting what the issue we are confronted with. And right now we have Manel Msalmi. Well, Manel Msalmi is, well, starting with a very good friend, and she was the key person in organizing this event. This would have not been possible without her. She is a tremendous activist. She is in Belgium, as I am. ARCHumankind is based in Brussels. She is working with a member of the European Parliament. She's advising him. But besides that, she is leading the women here in the Brussels city of a mainstream party, known as the Liberal Party, and she has been one of the most clear-minded persons I've met regarding what we have to do in the West to confront this threat of the fanaticism that she knows better than anybody else. She is coming from. She was born in Tunisia. She, for a variety of reasons, she has been a lot of times in Libya. She has, explained to me a bit how was it the Libya of Gaddafi, and she is a tremendous person to know and to work with. I'm so thankful for you, for your presence, and please, Manel, give us a bit the perspective of what should we do in front of this attack to such a dear country to all of us as the Emirates.
Thank you so much, dear Paulo. I'm really humbled and very honored to be here today. And I would like also to thank Irina and Ellie for joining us today. Of course, I would like to present my condolences to all the people victims of the terrorist attacks, and also my solidarity with the UAE and as well as all the families of these victims. Of course, we were shocked to hear that there was a terrorist attack in Abu Dhabi Airport, because it's a very, let's say, a very important spot. And of course, I know that this is as well symbolic regarding the place regarding also tourism in Abu Dhabi and UAE. And of course, UAE has been lately one of the major countries contributing to peace and coexistence in the region, and also heading the way in the Arab world regarding coexistence with its neighbors, but also regarding helping countries in need, especially helping the countries who suffer from a humanitarian crisis, including Syria and Yemen. Of course, we want to express solidarity with the Yemeni people, but of course, especially children and women. And we know that women are really suffering from the Houthis, especially in prisons, but also they are victims of torture, of persecution. as well as victims of rape and sexual abuse. So there are so many things that Europeans maybe ignore regarding the issue of the Houthis. Of course, when we see the course of events, how the Houthis come to power, and regarding what international mainstream media and the EU are vehiculing, mainstream media in the EU as well, is that the Houthis are legitimate to power, but unfortunately this is not the truth, and this is what not the media vehiculing. The Houthis are not, they are just a terrorist group, and they are just the proxies of Iran. And of course, you talked about Lebanon, about Hezbollah, about Hamas, but also about Iraq and Syria. So we have so many capital cities in the Arab world which are victims of Iran terrorism. Israel as well is victim of Iran terror. So all these countries in the region are victim. And targeting Abu Dhabi Airport is targeting also the UAE model of peace and the Abraham Accords. We have spoken about how the Abraham Accords were very important to the region to bringing peace and coexistence, but also to target terrorists and as well as fighting against terrorism and fighting against the radicalist Islam. So the fact that this propaganda is always targeted by the Houthis and Iran is showing that what the UAE doing and what Saudi Arabia doing by establishing peace and coexistence with its neighbor is really what Iran or what the Iranian regime really hates. You have spoken about Ahwazi people, also the minorities in Iran, and we already know these minorities are persecuted by the regime. Nobody speaks about the minorities. The same thing is happening with the Houthis. We have the Baha'i community, we have the Jewish community as well, are victims of the Houthis. All these communities are not protected. They are imprisoned. Freedom of speech, killing political prisoners and torturing them, and then death penalties. So all these practices are the same practices of the Iranian regime. So we have the Houthis copying actually what the Iranian regime is doing, and they are sympathizing with this torture and this persecution of women, dehumanizing women, children, also radicalizing young children, also the fact of the camps of education and radicalization of young children in Yemen. So we have a big humanitarian and a big crisis regarding children, and nobody's speaking about the famine in Yemen. Nobody's speaking about what these children are suffering every day. Education, women. Of course, the Houthi. This terrorist attacks was very popular because it's attacking an airport, but the Houthis were attacking the Yemeni people for so many years now, and we know that they present themselves to the EU, to USA, and to international media as an entity wanting to establish peace and also to defend the Yemeni people. But unfortunately, they are not defending the Yemeni people. They are not defending civilians. Civilians are victims of their terrorism. Of course, we have also the fact that they are helping Hezbollah. Also, they are sympathizing with Hezbollah, sympathizing with Hamas, helping the other Iran proxies in Iraq and Syria. And we have witnessed what happened to all these countries who are working with the Iranian regime is raising awareness and also having a propaganda anti-Israel, anti-US, anti the West, also anti-Europe, and we also in Europe we had so many terrorist attacks. targeting people who are political activists here in Europe, who are not protected on the European soil. Political opposition is not really protected because they are always targeted. Also, we have what the Iranian regime is doing is kidnapping, let's say, opposition leaders and putting them in jail and torturing them. So all these practices we already know. And Europe, I think, it hopefully started to recognize what it is this practice, especially espionage and the practice of intimidation regarding the families of opposition leaders, regarding also the freedom of speech, journalists, and nobody could do anything when we witnessed the death of Ruhollah Azam in Iran. Also, we have a Belgian researcher who is who was kidnapped, and he is now in Iran, and nobody could do anything to help him once he is in Iran. So we already know what happens with these political and terrorist groups. So I believe that Europe and the international community should support the Arab countries who are looking for coexistence and peace in the region, who are fighting against terrorist attacks, who are fighting against radical Islam, who are fighting against the Iranian regime, and also try to understand the conflict, really, what is really happening. Listen to the Yemeni people, to international organizations, to civilians, to women who are speaking and telling the truth, and they are victims of this indoctrination, victims of forced hijab, also victims of sexual abuse. These women have no voice. We always want to hear the other side of the story of women who are wearing the hijab because they are really convinced of that. But we don't want to see these women who are looking for liberty and freedom, and they want to take off the veil, like what happens in Iran. These women who are calling for their freedom, what they call the Iranian Spring, or what they call the Arab Spring. We have to listen to these women, and we have to support them, because this is our role. The role of the Western society is to support these women, to support freedom of speech, to support democracy, and to support the call for justice and equality, and also to support minorities, especially the Baha'i, the Jewish minority. It's a pity to find that there is only one family, Jewish family, remaining in Yemen. These people are Yemeni, and these people belong to the Yemeni society. We have the example of Abraham Accords, the example of coexistence and peace is very telling. We need more examples of peace and tolerance. We need more examples of coexistence. We need more examples of freedom and democracy, and we need to speak up about this. Thank you so much, and I will be happy to share my views with you. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Manel, thank you so much for this very passionate presentation. You are a European, a Brussels woman that has roots in the Arab world. You feel a lot the Arab world, the freedom of women of the Arab world, and of course I understand how shocked you are to see some institutions, instead of thinking of the freedom of women, say they do exactly the opposite. They say that, they forget that nobody forbids veils in the street, in the public transport in Brussels, but the reverse is true in Iran, for instance, and this is not taken into consideration. There is this deconstructivist philosophy, normally known as woke culture, that actually puts everything upside down. Those who attack women's rights, they are seen as some sort of freedom fighters. Those who discriminate, persecute, and murder minorities, of course, starting with the Jews, but not only, as you said, Jewish minorities, they are seen as a minority themselves, which they are really not. Those who are, by all objective points of view, extreme right, there is no other way of saying it. They are the real extreme right. They are presented in sometimes with this left Islamism, which is a very odd concept. That's a reality, but this is a reality of people that put the world upside down. I have some comments here already coming from Facebook and ARCHumankind on the United Nations Secretary General position. I think this was very important indeed. I think that it was important that the United Nations said that this is absolutely prohibited from the point of view of international law.
Paulo,
yes.
Can I jump in for one other?
Absolutely,
thank
Ellie.
you. There's one other item that I want to mention, and I'm so grateful for Manel for speaking about this last Jewish family that was left in Yemen. But the reality, it's no longer a family. So we have a situation right now where the Houthis have, for 6 years, wrongfully detained a Jewish man by the name of Levi Marhabi. And there's an international campaign demanding his release. And so I do want to take this opportunity to once again bring the world's attention to the fate of Levi Marhabi. He committed no crime. His only crime was that of being a Jew. And this is yet another example of the Houthis' vile human rights violations against the people of Yemen. And I just want to say again that we demand that the Houthis release Levi Marhabi immediately.
Let me just tell you, we all second your call. This is a blatant case of racism, and it should not be tolerated, and we should condemn it without any hesitation. I was speaking about the reactions. We have here another reaction on the issue of how can we see how far the Taliban and these Houthis, Ansar Allah, can be compared. That's a very interesting question. I don't know if any of you want to touch it. Irina, yes? We are not hearing you.
So there are important similarities and differences. The major similarity, of course, is that both are Islamist groups, and the Houthis did take comfort in the Taliban being promoted under the previous administration as a security partner for the US, and under the current administration, it was allowed to take over Afghanistan with no resistance, with the complete abandonment of US equipment, personnel, people, and allies inside the country. And the Houthis, who were also benefited from being delisted under the current administration, they took note, and in fact, they congratulated the Taliban on coming to power. This was a formal statement. We've seen that Houthis have invited people from other groups like Hamas for visits and formal exchanges and some level of cooperation. Actually, they've extended their offer to assist Hamas in the war against Israel last May. We may see that sort of cooperation with the Taliban, particularly on the issue of drug exportation. Yemen is one of the primary export points for drugs into the rest of the Middle East, and Hezbollah has had long-standing relations with the Taliban over that. So of course there is that similarity. Someone mentioned also the similarity in intermarriage. Taliban, there's virtually no distinction between Taliban, Al Qaeda, and ISIS-K. because all these groups migrate fighters. That today they wear one uniform, tomorrow another, and they marry among each other. So trying to make distinctions among these groups and claim that they're all enemies, that one group is somehow the savior of Afghanistan from the rest is nonsensical. There is an important distinction in that Taliban has been politically trained by Qatar over many years of political support and has become much more versatile in adapting to Western notions of uh, uh, engagement and diplomacy for propaganda purposes, which is how they ended up in power to begin with. They were able to allow the consecutive administrations to play that political game. Houthis, on the other hand, are priding themselves on being even more radical than Iran, even, and have rejected all efforts at diplomatic engagement, whether by the Arab coalition, the United States, or other actors. Nevertheless, the administration has made statements that because of their territorial control, they are a de facto political actor or authority on the ground, and despite their refusal to engage, has treated them as almost an authority, although they have no legitimacy other than by force. So these are important distinctions and similarities to keep in mind. It is possible that with time Houthis will be pressured to adapt a more sophisticated diplomatic approach, but they don't have to, they don't need to at the moment. And I know that that Biden stated that the status of relisting them under the FTO is under review, but I tend to be less optimistic about it than many of the people who have commented about it, because this is not a new statement. This is a repetition of comments that's been made a few months previously, and that it does not have any concrete timeline to delivery. So while the Vienna talks with Iran are ongoing, there's no reason to believe that that the administration will do anything it sees as potentially derailing those talks.
Thank you so much, Irina. This was really a lesson. Actually, yes, the Taliban obviously got a lot of diplomatic propaganda making out of Qatar, their main diplomatic sponsor. And you are right. Most likely the Houthis did not yet do it. They do not feel it necessary, but they might. They might do it one day, if not from Tehran, from somewhere else like that. But Dr. Siegfried Wolf, that formulated this question, Dr. Siegfried Wolf is my companion in South Asia Democratic Forum, and he has been following very closely. He was working in a NATO consultative group on Afghanistan, and especially on the role of Pakistan in Afghanistan. He asked a curious question that goes to Ellie. I don't know if you see it on the comments side, but the question is, do you think that this apparent, repenting of the Biden administration for withdrawing the Houthis from the list of the terrorist organizations, do you think that the Biden administration could also rethink what they have done in Afghanistan with the Taliban?
I wish there were some hope for that, but I'm not optimistic. And there are numerous reasons why. The reality is that the American people have no appetite right now for being involved in conflict zones, and so that makes things rather difficult. But the other, I would say, the bigger reason why the Biden administration would not reverse course is that it's the scale of the disaster that the Afghanistan withdrawal was. the scale of the disaster is so huge that if they were to admit their mistake at this point, I think it would be an impossible political obstacle for them to ever overcome, meaning that we have every expectation that in the congressional US 2022 elections that are coming up, and then of course the 2024 presidential elections that are coming up in the United States, that the Biden administration's disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal is going to be a very big political issue for them. We expect that the Republican Party will use this against the Biden administration, and I think the administration themselves are fully aware of again the scale of the disaster that it was, right? So you have American citizens that are still left over there. You've got the Taliban takeover of the country. You've got the $80 billion worth of advanced military equipment that was left behind. And then maybe perhaps most importantly, you've got the abandonment of the Bagram Air Base, which is the size of a town in the United States of America. And reports that I'm hearing are that the Chinese have very quickly made their way into Afghanistan, that they are very quickly using the country's resources. And so, the United States left the scene and the Chinese very quickly came into the scene. So all of those factors are again, a huge national security disaster for the United States. There is also this expectation that, perhaps we're sensing a little bit of quiet right now, but that the quiet out of Afghanistan is not going to last. And that it's going to come back and bite the United States. And so for all of those reasons, I don't see the Biden administration reversing course on Afghanistan, because it would be a real acceptance and a real, really kind of broadcasting that they themselves understand the level of disaster that the withdrawal was.
Thank you so much, Ellie. I do understand very well what you said. Unfortunately, every day we are receiving witnesses of tremendous crimes against human rights in Afghanistan. Against women, for instance, they are going house after house to kidnap, to arrest women that have been identified as protesting against their complete the disrespect of freedom and human rights that they imposed in the country after occupying it. We are nearly without any more time in our debate, but if any of you want to give a final word, you are very much welcome to. From my side, I would just like to say that I am absolutely very, very thankful for the three of you. You were magnificent. You are magnificent, and I'm sure you still you will be showing this in a lot of other occasions. We did mark very clearly the point. We have to look at this terror organization that is destroying and annihilating Yemen as a big danger. The source of it is in Tehran, nowhere else. And we have to fight against it. We have to show our solidarity with the Iranian people fighting against this horrendous dictatorship. And we cannot hide our heads in the sand. And certainly we cannot put things upside down and showing victims like being the perpetrators of the crime, and vice versa, these perpetrators of the crimes as being the victims. This is crucial to do. A lot of solidarity to the Emirates. I hope I will be there soon. And a lot of solidarity to all of those who are in this same struggle. Thanks to all of you that have been listening to us. Thanks for your participation. Looking forward to seeing you in the next not so distant occasion. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you so much.
Goodbye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we can, yeah.